In today's video, we'll be introducing civil liberties. Please note that the slides do not have many words beyond their titles, so you need to listen and write down what you hear as best you can. You should use this as an opportunity to practice summarizing. You do not need to have everything that I say word for word written down. The objective in today's video is to explain how the 14th Amendment and the U.S. Supreme Court changed the interpretation of the Bill of Rights, looking at how did the Bill of Rights change over time. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. As a reminder, in order to pass an amendment, you need 2/3 of the House and Senate to first vote on those amendments, and then it gets sent to the states where 3/4 of the states must ratify it in state conventions. This represents the principle of federalism. States left the Articles of Confederation, but they wanted safeguards against the new strong central government that had been created under the U.S. Constitution. Anti-federalists in particular argued heavily in favor of including a Bill of Rights, and they used that argument to explain why they actually did not even support the original Constitution. But Federalists like James Madison promised that one of the first orders of business when they created the new government would be to add a Bill of Rights, and they did. They used the amendment process, and they added a Bill of Rights to restrict the government and to give citizens freedoms. Questions quickly arose over whether or not the Bill of Rights restricted all governments in the U.S. federal system or just the federal national government. As in, did local and state governments need to follow the Bill of Rights as well? In Barron versus Baltimore, it was determined by the U.S. Supreme Court that the Bill of Rights only restricted the federal government. States many of them already had their own Bill of Rights, and so they didn't think that they needed to follow the national government's ones. That meant that you could potentially live in Georgia and not have freedom of religion, but you could live in Pennsylvania and have freedom of religion. So at this point, the state governments were free to restrict their people's freedoms. And many states did this through their state laws, so certain groups were not protected from their own state governments. So the national government had to follow the Bill of Rights, like freedom of speech, like the right to bear arms, like the protection from search and seizures, the granting of lawyers, etc. But the states did not have to. In 1860, we have the U.S. Civil War, where the South, in an attempt to maintain the institution of slavery, broke apart from the North, the United States government, and tried to form their own country. There was, of course, a 4-year war that resulted in the South losing and the North occupying the South. This had major effects on the U.S. Constitution. In order to rejoin the Union, which, because they lost the war, they had to do, the Southern states had to agree to ratify a series of 3 amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 13th and 15th Amendments ended slavery and gave African Americans the right to vote, respectively. The 14th Amendment is the more complicated one. The 14th Amendment included many clauses, including the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. Today we're going to look at the Due Process Clause. When Congress and the states adopted the 14th Amendment and its Due Process Clause, it stated, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process." This fundamentally overturned the Barron versus Baltimore decision that had said that only the national government had to follow the Bill of Rights. Now it says the states could not take away basic liberties provided in the Bill of Rights. But like many things, things did not change all at once, making the entire Bill of Rights apply to the states. It was instead now up to the courts to define and select the basic liberties from the Bill of Rights that could be incorporated to the states and thus guarantee protection for the citizens from all levels of government. So the courts had to decide. They could say that all of the rights in the Bill of Rights apply to the states and the states must follow them all, or they could apply them one at a time. In Gitlow versus New York, Benjamin Gitlow had been arrested and convicted under a New York state law of advocating the violent overthrow of the U.S. government, even though he did not actually attempt to overthrow it himself. He was just passing out flyers. He believed New York's law had violated his right to free press and speech, which he believed was a basic liberty that states should not be able to take away with the 14th Amendment now in place. He sought for the court to overturn Barron versus Baltimore and also declare New York state law unconstitutional. The court ruled that under the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, on principle, New York did not have the right to restrict someone's free speech. They basically had selected speech as a basic liberty that could be incorporated to state level as well. So incorporated means to be included, to be taken and added to what you're already doing. However, unfortunately for Gitlow, they determined that the law that he had broken was not a violation of his free speech, as he had presented a danger to the country. So New York and other states were simply cautioned that they could not pass laws in the future that violated freedom of speech. The ruling from Gitlow versus New York did not instantly make all the liberties from the Bill of Rights apply to the states. It only selected speech as a fundamental liberty, a very important freedom that states couldn't violate. Under the new doctrine of selective incorporation, individual court cases that followed would have to select each individual liberty to be incorporated to the states. They said they would do speech only because it is a fundamental right. And that would mean they would have to hear cases on each right as they came up and decide if it is a fundamental right and should be incorporated. Over time, almost every right has been incorporated. In the packet that was sent home, there are 4 questions which you should use this information to finish. Stay safe and have a good day.